Okie dokie. So, let's talk a little bit about tolerance. Hi there, I'm Charlie. I'm a board certified behaviour analyst. I work with young people with autism and ADHD and additional needs, and I specialise in helping people with behaviours of concern or looking at skills teaching and behaviour management, all of these kinds of elements which help people to access educational care settings easier than they would do without support. So, tolerance is a really important area when we're talking about behaviour, because in this case we're not talking about tolerance in terms of like inclusivity, right, which would be tolerating people being in the same environment as you who have a difference in opinion or a difference in presentation. That is obviously a part of this, but it's more of a behavioural tolerance lens that we're looking at things through here, which is your ability to be exposed to things which you find unpleasant or overwhelming, and then your ability to get through that process without having to leave or engage in secondary behaviours which help you to regulate, allowing you to access that situation in a way which is more typical and advantageous to you. Right? So tolerance is really important, and it comes into effect with people who have autism or ADHD or other conditions which might act as a barrier to them accessing ordinary facilities by them having reduced tolerances for some things and increased tolerances for others. This basically means that some of the intolerances that, for example, a person with autism might have around having a lot of social attention put onto them, especially when they don't understand the context, might affect their ability to go to another place which contains a lot of people, because the amount of times that they can experience that sensation of being observed and tolerate it is much lower. And this leads to a much more severe reaction when they actually go over their tolerance threshold and then need to use some kind of escape mechanism to be able to get themselves out. Okay, so tolerance and tolerance-based behaviours, or intolerance-based behaviours in this case, ones which get you away from things that you don't like, are really important. These are negative reinforcement behaviours, which are all about being maintained by successfully removing things which you view to be aversive, meaning that something is presented that you don't like. You do something to try and get rid of it, and either you get rid of it or you don't. So that's your ABC, your antecedent behaviour consequence model for how that particularly works. For tolerance, it looks a bit like this, but it has one element which is different, which is you don't try and escape from it. So unpleasant thing is presented, you maintain yourself inside of this environment that contains the negative thing. You might even directly experience it or perceive the aversive thing as it's coming more into your perception. And then you either successfully tolerate this aversive stimulus and get through the process without having to escape from it, which will reinforce you tolerating it because eventually it went away, or the thing will stay for too long or become too obvious to you, depending upon what level of aversion we're dealing with here, right? Is it a problem of it's something that you don't like, that's very low level that you're going to have to maintain being okay with inside of an environment, or is it something highly intense which you're going to immediately try and get away from because the intensity level was so high that it was intolerable to you, right? And this is very important, right? Because the strategies that you select when you are going into an environment will determine how successful you're going to be inside of that environment. If you can tolerate being there for a longer period of time, you are going to encounter a higher number of opportunities to engage in different behaviours inside of that environment, that environment might be exclusively controlling. And because of this, you are more likely to get some of the outcomes associated with those behaviours because you were able to tolerate being there for a longer period of time or for more very unpleasant things happening. Okay, and so this kind of highlights how you teach tolerance-based behaviours. What you effectively have to do is you have to get somebody into the situation which has the thing which they are not able to tolerate, and you have to try and get them through either increasing durations of time with the thing being present. This might be your classic phobia program, where effectively you start with the less physical or less sensory elements of the thing that you're afraid of being inside of the environment. You might start by thinking about it, talking about it, just getting used to the idea of the thing being, presented to you for that more obvious period of time and for that kind of more increasing intensity. Right, and then as you are able to tolerate the specified period of time, you may have external reinforcement, which is there to kind of like help you realize that by getting through that tolerance response, you got some good outcome out of it, which was balancing it out. Now, In a more natural environment, this would be more self-maintaining. So what happens is you go into an environment, you manage to tolerate being in it for the extended period of time, you get through it, and you maybe get to some opportunities inside of that place that you would have been escaping from in a different time, right? And then this causes you to want to go back to the place more, even though it contains those negative things or those things that you find to be aversive inside of the situation, right? The general idea is you can classify the level of toleration that you are having to experience by the dimension of the behaviour of toleration. So is it that I am having to not engage in escape behaviours from this situation for a longer period of time, which is a temporal duration or a temporal extent dimension, right? It could be that you go for magnitude of aversion, and this thing is very unpleasant and it's going to be very short in duration, and it may not happen all the time that I'm inside of this place. So instead, what's going to happen is every time that it occurs, I get this kind of urge to leave. So we're going to see how many times I can get through it occurring before I would have to get out to maintain my level of regulation. Okay? So this basically means that the way that you fail this procedure is overexposure, right? You are presented with too much density of aversion at one time, which causes you to have to escape from it, which means that you're going to anticipate in future that when this situation is presented to you, you're going to need to escape from it again, and you're probably going to try and escape from it even faster than you did last time, right? So by selecting the wrong level of toleration, it will overwhelm the person, and the person will need to get away from the thing which you are trying to teach them with, and this will cause them to actually lose tolerance inside of the situation rather than gain it. The way around this is to actually select the target level of the tolerance that you are trying to present much, much more carefully, and to start from a level that the person is actually already able to tolerate, so that you are then able to reinforce this level of toleration to indicate that the increasing level of tolerance is going to lead to the reinforcement which is provided by the procedure. Okay, so this basically means that if you are able to take some quite careful data about what it is that caused you to need to escape from a situation previously, for example, you encountered 3 different occasions where this unpleasant thing that you're trying to avoid happened, and on the 3rd time you really found it to be intolerant, or intolerable, rather. You then can go, okay, well, what if after the second one reinforcement is provided, and you could either continue to do sets of two of these trials, these teaching trials is really what they are, and then each time you gain reinforcement, which should hopefully re-regulate you and allow you to get back out of that situation and tolerate it again. Or this is the way that you often have to go when there's very intense reactions after an intolerance response. You may actually remove the person from needing to tolerate the situation after that 2 exposures, and then provide the reinforcement then and get them out, so that when you go back in, they definitely haven't had to re-expose and become less tolerant and become a bit overwhelmed by it. Okay, so this is really useful when you feel like you're supporting somebody who has a very limited number of environments that they can go to, or you're finding that their interactions with peers or with people who have similar difficulties to them are much less tolerant than you would hope in the situation that you're in. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to build up that person's ability to be able to engage in an increased variance of activities or interactions with people if it's a social communication tolerance that we're dealing with here. The thing that you can find is that once tolerance is trained, it can mess with perception of aversion afterwards, though. If you are basically forced into a situation of having to tolerate a lot in a row, eventually you are desensitized towards aversion, and this can go beyond the level of just becoming tolerant to it. You can become almost desensitized to it. You can become avoidant to it, but in a manner which doesn't require you to actually leave. Some people will do what's called dissociation, where they go into a place inside of themselves where they can tolerate a lot more than they would as average, and they normally have developed this mechanism because they haven't actually been allowed to escape from a situation which is truly intolerable, so they escape into themselves. That, as you might imagine, has a lot of long-term effects on a person's mental health, and so highly recommend that you don't get to that point, that you actually try and be a bit more systematic about your exposure to these things. Obviously, that's a very brief primer on tolerance, and there is a lot more that I can kind of go into on the different strands about how you would deal with, tolerance by frequency, tolerance by duration, tolerance by intensity, all of these different ways that you can kind of attack this problem when you've got a different kind of issue that you're trying to help somebody to deal with. But that said, obviously, I am one professional with some experience with dealing with these things, and obviously I've done quite a lot of them to myself to be able to build my tolerance, to be able to go out and do all the things that I want to do. But there will be many other professionals who have different skill sets who would be able to add to this, or potentially even correct me if there's some things which I am doing which have a more optimal presentation, and it may very well be that they could even explain this significantly less colloquially, I guess. Last thing that I wanted to talk about is I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who has viewed like anything that we've done over the last week. We've been doing a bit of a test while we're doing the more direct to camera stuff, just seeing whether this is something which people wanted to see, and trying out things like, you know, putting some shorts out every day, that kind of thing. And we got some reaction to it, which I was happy about. So thank you to anyone who commented on one of those shorts, especially with anything which had a question in it, so that we could kind of get backwards and forwards. Honestly, don't mind people even being contradictory or negative about an opinion or an expertise level that I've got somewhere. I think that it's very important that we be willing to put ourselves in front of people and answer questions until there are no more questions to be answered. So looking forward to more of that. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye!